My name is Avery Callahan, 41 years old. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, the color of printer toner, the kind of gray that eats light. I was in my home office, the one with the north window and the wall I'd built to hold my life. Signed jerseys, perfectly spaced, framed in museum glass that caught the morning in quiet rectangles. 23 years of collecting, cataloging, and protecting. My father's handwriting on the earliest COAs. My notes on the later ones. A life arranged like a timeline with stitches. Ethan never liked this room. He called it the Jersey Shrine and said it like the words had dust on them. Sports memorabilia is just grown people playing with toys, he'd tell our friends when they stood in front of the Brady wall, trying not to look impressed. I kept my face polite on those nights. My father had cried during that first Super Bowl trophy presentation. I learned then not everything sacred asks permission to exist. The papers cited irreconcilable differences. Lawyers love distance in nouns. I knew what it meant. It meant Danielle. Ethan's yoga instructor with a voice like a meditation app and the kind of tan you schedule. 8 months. I didn't guess. I verified. A private investigator earns their fee when hotel charges say Wellness Inn on weekends. Ethan was supposed to be in Flagstaff seeing his cousin. 3 days after I signed for the envelope, Ethan's lawyer called, with a tone that had practice at sounding reasonable. My client is entitled to half of all marital assets, he said, like he'd discovered gravity, including your sports collection. I laughed. It wasn't performative. It just came out, sharp and honest. Those jerseys are mine, I said. I bought every one before we were married. Doesn't matter, he replied, and I could hear the shrug. They've appreciated during the marriage. He, a flustered shuffle, is entitled to half their current worth, approximately $340,000. It's a strange thing to feel your blood go cold while your skin goes hot. The collection was not a number to me. It was the flutie I saved for as a broke grad student, ramen, and night shifts. The bird my dad gave me at graduation, his last healthy Christmas. The Brady I bought the morning after we won because grief had finally learned to share space with joy. If Ethan wanted the house, the cars, the joint savings, I would split the ledger to the penny. But not that wall. Not my father's handwriting pressed into the margins of my life. That night, I sat alone and looked at the frames until the glass reflected a woman I recognized only because she was still upright. Every time Ethan had rolled his eyes at a new frame, a small part of me had learned to put the good things somewhere his opinion couldn't reach. And then a thought slid across the room and took a chair beside me. If he wants to play money, he better learn the rules of value. I called Trevor Martinez at 7:02 the next morning. He owns Sports Legends downtown, the only place in this city that smells like leather, ink, and cardboard the way my childhood did. I need a favor, I said, and he didn't ask why. He just asked how quickly. Before the sun had burned the frost off the grass, I had a list. I photographed every jersey on my wall from every possible angle. Front, back, stitch close-ups, sleeve tags, with timestamps. Then I pulled each frame like a tooth and laid the jerseys flat on acid-free paper. The office looked like an operating room. I felt calm in the way I get when I'm holding a scalpel of facts. Ethan's side had already filed a motion to seize the collection. They had valuations. They had screenshots. They had the easy arrogance of people who mistake a picture for proof. I packed a box and drove to Trevor's shop. He lifted the lid and whistled. You sure? As sure as I've ever been, I said. The plan wasn't theatrical. It was procedural. It relied on something Ethan had always counted on. Assumptions. In the next 72 hours, I did the kind of work my job had trained me for. Tedious, exact, bulletproof. I documented the chain of custody for my authentic pieces. Every COA, every dated receipt, every third-party certification, with a timeline that started years before my marriage. I pulled the insurance policies we filed jointly for 8 years and highlighted the exact place where I'd excluded valuable collectibles at our residence. I paid my storage facility for an additional camera on my unit and pulled a fresh video log of my access. Paper beats posture in court. Video beats memory. Then I bought things. 37 high-quality replica jerseys from various online retailers. I kept the receipts, $23 here, $31 there. Printed signatures as clean as menu fonts. I put them in frames that cost triple the fabric and hung them where the old ones had been. The room looked the same to anyone not looking. On Friday afternoon, Ethan texted, "Heard you're lawyering up. This is going to get expensive if you're petty." A half laugh made it to my throat and died there. "You don't know me at all," I typed, then deleted. I sent nothing. Silence is not surrender when you're building a record. The hearing set for Monday felt like a cliff with a schedule. The weekend passed in lists, binders tabbed by exhibit, flash drive backups, 2 magnifying glasses in case one became theater. Trevor came over Sunday night with coffee and a look that said he'd seen people lose more than money in rooms like the one we were walking into. "You're good," he said, flipping through the binder. "You're better than good." I slept for 3 hours and dreamed I was back in my father's basement. The good couch, the ugly lamp, him wiping his eyes with the back of his hand while the announcer tried to stay professional. In the dream, he turned to me and said, "Protect what you love from people who think it costs what it's worth." On Monday, I chose a navy suit and the smallest pair of earrings I own. The courthouse smelled like polish and worry. Ethan sat across the aisle in a suit that didn't look like him, Danielle absent, but present in the way expensive cologne lingers. His lawyer's tie was the color of a warning. They made a row of confidence. Ethan, counsel, 2 paralegals, a man in a blazer I assumed was their appraiser. "My client is entitled to half the value of the defendant's sports memorabilia collection," his lawyer began, voice smooth, "valued at $340,000. The judge turned to me. "Miss Callahan?" I stood, slid a folder from my briefcase, and felt the room balance on the hinge of this moment. "Your Honor," I said, "the nature of this case is about to change." And then, very carefully, I began. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that doesn't come from air conditioning, the kind that seeps in through nerves and polished marble. Ethan sat across from me, all polished smugness, legs crossed, wedding ring already gone. Danielle wasn't there, of course, but I could see her fingerprints in the way his collar was pressed too crisp, his tie color coordinated with his pocket square. He looked like someone who believed the story was already written. He just needed the judge to read the last page. "My client is entitled to half the value of Ms. Callahan's sports memorabilia collection," his lawyer began smoothly, "valued at approximately $340,000, based on photographs and appraisals provided." Appraisals based on photographs, of course. The judge, a small, watchful man named Harris, adjusted his glasses. "Miss Callahan?" I stood, my folder in hand. The paper felt heavier than it should have. "Your Honor," I said evenly, "I'd like to submit new evidence that redefines the assets in question." Ethan's lawyer turned slightly, just enough to smirk. "New evidence?" I met his gaze. "Correct." The clerk took the folder, walking it over to the bench. Judge Harris opened it, flipping through pages. "These," I explained, "are purchase receipts for 37 high-quality replica jerseys purchased within the last 10 days. Each one photographed and cataloged." I paused. "Total cost, $2,047. The room went quiet. Even the sound of someone clearing their throat felt too loud. Ethan frowned. "What is this, Avery?" I ignored him. "If Your Honor examines the signatures closely, you'll notice something consistent." The bailiff handed him the magnifying glass I'd brought. Judge Harris leaned forward, examining one of the exhibits. "The signatures appear to be printed, not handwritten," he said slowly. "Exactly," I said, "because they're not real autographs. They're printed facsimiles. These jerseys are replicas, mass-produced $20 fakes. They're what have been hanging on the walls of our home for 8 years. Ethan's lawyer blinked. "That's impossible. We've seen those jerseys for years." "You've seen frames," I interrupted, "and printed signatures. The frames cost more than the fabric inside them." I took a step forward, voice calm but precise. "My husband has lived with replicas in expensive frames for almost a decade, believing they were authentic because he never looked closely. He was content to let me hang what he thought were trophies. He just didn't care enough to learn the difference." Ethan stood up, his face tightening. "You're lying. I've held those jerseys." I turned toward him, lowering my voice. "No, Ethan. You've held placeholders. You assume their worth without understanding their value." Trevor, seated in the back, hid a grin behind his coffee cup. Ethan's lawyer tried to pivot. "Even if that's true, the appraiser verified authenticity." "Based on photos and my husband's descriptions," I said. "No physical inspection, no certification." I handed another document to the clerk. These are the insurance policies for our household. You'll notice there's no coverage for valuable collectibles or memorabilia, because I excluded them myself every year. Judge Harris turned a page, and these policies were signed by both parties. Yes, I said, signed by Ethan, who never read a word of them. He was too busy making jokes about grown women and their toys. The judge made a note. Go on. I reached into my bag and pulled out a USB drive. Your Honor, this is video footage from my secure storage unit dated 3 days ago. It shows me accessing my authentic jersey collection, the ones purchased before my marriage and stored off-site for preservation. The clerk inserted it into the courtroom screen. The video played, me, gloved hands, climate-controlled lighting, carefully removing one of the real jerseys, the Brady Super Bowl piece, from its sealed display. The difference was obvious. The texture, the weight, the living ink of the signature. I lifted the lid of a box beside me and pulled it out, holding it carefully. This, I said, laying it on the table, is the authentic Tom Brady jersey, purchased in 2001 for $2,200, now worth around $18,000. Then I pulled out the second. And this, I continued, is what's been hanging in our home for 8 years, purchased last week on eBay for $23,000. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Harris looked impressed. The color difference alone was striking. The real one glowed like history. The replica looked like polyester pretending to be silk. The contrast, he murmured, is quite clear. Ethan's lawyer shuffled his papers. Your Honor, surely this... Judge Harris cut him off. Are you disputing that the collection on display in the marital home are replicas? We haven't examined them in person, the lawyer stammered. That's because you never asked, I said softly. Ethan glared at me, jaw tight. You've been deceiving me. I met his eyes. No, Ethan, I never claimed those were real. You just never cared enough to ask. When I told you I was getting them preserved, I meant it literally, in storage. The silence that followed was heavy. His lawyer tried a new angle. Your Honor, this is deliberate deceit. My client was led to believe. By assumption, Judge Harris said, voice sharpening, not by misrepresentation. I stepped forward again, my voice steady now. For 8 years, Ethan has been walking past replicas of something he never valued, while the real collection, the one I built before our marriage, sat in climate-controlled storage, safe from neglect. The judge turned to me. Ms. Callahan, are you asserting that the authentic collection is a premarital asset? Yes, Your Honor. Every authentic jersey was purchased before our marriage, with full documentation to prove it. Judge Harris nodded. And that these replicas, displayed in the home, hold negligible market value? Correct. Less than $3,000 total. Ethan's voice broke through the air, half shouted, half pleading. You can't do this. You can't just hide assets. I didn't even look at him. I didn't hide anything. You just never looked close enough to see the truth. The judge set his pen down. Mr. Callahan, it appears the collection your attorney valued at $340,000 consists entirely of low-value replicas. The authentic memorabilia were acquired prior to the marriage and kept separately, with no evidence of commingling. Ethan's lawyer went pale. But the appreciation doesn't apply to replicas, the judge said. Trevor shifted in his seat, whispering, and that's game. I exhaled for the first time in an hour. Judge Harris closed his folder. The court finds that Ms. Callahan's memorabilia collection remains her sole, separate property. The replicas displayed in the marital home will be excluded from valuation. We'll move on to the division of joint assets. Ethan's face drained of color. He turned toward me, a mix of disbelief and humiliation tightening his features. You planned this, he hissed. I met his gaze one last time. No, Ethan, I prepared for it. His lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client will also be seeking alimony. I smiled faintly. Of course he will, because I already knew what I'd be bringing to court next. And it wasn't sympathy. By the time we returned from lunch recess, Ethan had changed tactics. Gone was the puffed-up bravado from the morning. In its place sat a mask of quiet victimhood. His shoulders slouched, his expression carefully curated to suggest exhaustion and wounded pride. If I didn't know better, I'd almost have believed him. His lawyer rose first, voice lower now, patient, almost fatherly. Your Honor, he began, while we acknowledge the court's decision regarding the memorabilia, my client remains financially disadvantaged. He has been unemployed for the past 2 years, supporting Ms. Callahan's lifestyle. He is entitled to alimony and a fair division of the marital home. I didn't flinch. I'd been waiting for this move. Judge Harris turned toward me. Ms. Callahan, response? I stood calm, folder in hand. Your Honor, before we discuss alimony, I'd like to clarify the accuracy of my husband's claim. Ethan's lawyer frowned. What claim? That he's been unemployed. I flipped open my binder and handed the bailiff a thick stack of documents. Bank statements, text message transcripts, transaction histories. The bailiff delivered them to the judge. These show, I continued, that Ethan has been operating an unlicensed performance coaching and personal training business for at least 2 years. The deposits total $67,480, none of which were reported to the IRS. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Ethan blinked rapidly, the way people do when they're recalculating their story. That's not true, he said quickly. Those were gifts from friends, I finished for him, because that's what you said to me the last time I asked. I slid another page forward. Except these friends are all listed in your phone as clients. They pay you the same amount, $80, every Tuesday and Thursday, consistently for over a year. And several of those clients were referrals from Danielle, your yoga instructor. Trevor coughed quietly into his hand. The bailiff failed to hide a smirk. Ethan's lawyer took a long breath. Your Honor, we weren't aware of this. I imagine you weren't, I said. He didn't tell me either, but the deposits tell their own story. The judge flipped through the records, expression tightening. Mr. Callahan, he said, these documents show consistent income patterns. Can you explain why this income was omitted from your disclosure forms? Ethan's voice cracked. Because it wasn't a business. It was casual. I wasn't running an unlicensed operation, the judge interrupted. Collecting payment for services rendered? That's the definition of a business, Mr. Callahan. Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, perhaps we should... The judge raised a hand. Silence for a moment. He turned back to Ethan. Were these earnings reported on your tax returns? Ethan swallowed. No. The judge's eyes narrowed. Are you claiming they were gifts? Ethan hesitated. Maybe some of them. I handed over the next document, printouts of his text messages, appointment confirmations, rate discussions, payment reminders, the digital equivalent of a confession. Your Honor, I said softly, he wasn't giving massages or yoga classes. He was marketing himself as a performance coach. Same clients, same hours, every week. Sometimes Danielle processed payments for him. The judge set the papers down. So not only were you earning undisclosed income, you were collaborating with a third party to conceal it? Ethan's voice dropped into a whisper. This is ridiculous. The judge leaned forward, his tone clipped. Mr. Callahan, lying under oath about your financial situation is perjury. And if what Ms. Callahan is presenting is accurate, you've also committed tax evasion. Do you wish to amend your financial disclosure? Ethan looked at his lawyer, who whispered something frantic and desperate. After a long pause, he nodded. I'd like to amend, he muttered. The judge tapped his pen. Noted. Trevor shot me a small, proud nod from the back row. Ethan's lawyer, pale and sweating, finally spoke. Your Honor, my client estimates perhaps $45,000 total in unreported income. I didn't even bother hiding the smile. I have bank records showing $67,000, I said. The judge turned toward Ethan again. Mrs. Callahan's documents seem quite thorough. Care to correct your figure? Ethan slumped. About $67,000, he whispered. Judge Harris made a note, his tone suddenly heavier. So, Mr. Callahan, you've been running an unlicensed business, evading taxes, and misrepresenting your financial status while petitioning for alimony? He nodded once, small and defeated. The judge leaned back. Under normal circumstances, a dependent spouse might be entitled to support, but fraud changes the math. He turned to me. Miss Callahan, what's your proposal for asset division? I'd rehearsed this line a dozen times, but saying it out loud still felt electric. Your Honor, I said, based on my husband's misrepresentation of income and the ongoing IRS implications, I believe he has forfeited his right to alimony. I'm willing to divide only legitimate marital assets. I handed over another folder. The house has $285,000 in equity. He can have $142,500. His half. He keeps his car. I keep mine. Joint savings split evenly. All premarital assets remain separate. No alimony. Ethan's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but the judge was already speaking. I find Ms. Callahan's proposal reasonable, he said. Given the undisclosed income, the court will deny alimony. Marital assets will be divided as outlined. Mrs. Callahan retains all premarital property. He turned to Ethan. Additionally, the IRS will be notified of this unreported income. You'll be responsible for any back taxes and penalties. Ethan's lawyer sighed like he was exhaling a confession. The gavel hit the desk once, sharp and final. This court is adjourned. Outside, the sunlight felt too bright. Ethan caught up to me on the courthouse steps, his voice low, furious. You planned this, every bit of it. I turned to face him, the file still under my arm. No, Ethan, I didn't plan it. I just paid attention. He stared at me for a long second, jaw tight, hands balled into fists. You humiliated me in there. I took a breath. You humiliated yourself. I just kept the receipts. For a moment, he looked like he might say something else, some final barb or plea, but instead, he just shook his head and walked away. Trevor was waiting at the curb, leaning on his truck. You okay? Better than okay, I said, and meant it, for the first time in a long time. He handed me a to-go coffee and grinned. Guessing you're not sharing half of that either. I laughed, the sound startlingly light. No, I said. I paid for this one, so I'm keeping it. That night, I sat alone in my now quiet house, surrounded by the replicas I'd hung to survive the war. The room felt hollow without the weight of the real jerseys, but it was a clean hollow, like a wound that was finally healing. Tomorrow, I'd go to the storage unit and bring them home, the real ones, the ones that had been waiting for me all along. The next morning, I drove to the storage facility with the same mixture of nerves and peace I imagine people feel when reclaiming something sacred from a vault. The attendant recognized me immediately. Locker 218, right? Yeah, I said, smiling faintly. The one that's been asleep for 8 years. He handed me the keys. Welcome home, then. When I opened the metal door, the cold air inside smelled like time, dust, paper, and the faint tang of leather. The light flickered once before settling into a steady glow over the boxes stacked neatly against the wall. Every label was in my handwriting. Bird, Brady, Flutie, Dad's Christmas. I ran my fingers across the nearest frame before unsealing it, tracing the glass like it was a pulse. The colors were still sharp, the ink still alive. My father's careful signature on the old COA looked exactly as it had the day he'd handed it to me and said, "Take care of things that take care of you." For the first time since the divorce began, I let myself cry. Not out of anger, not loss, just release. When I'd hung replicas in my house all those years, I'd thought I was being clever. But standing there, surrounded by the real ones, I realized it hadn't just been protection. It had been survival. Keeping them away had kept me from forgetting who I was. By that evening, the real collection was back where it belonged. The replicas, stripped from their frames, sat in a pile like hollow ghosts. Trevor stopped by, arms full of bubble wrap and takeout. Figured you'd forget to eat, he said, setting the food down. Then he whistled low. God, Avery, look at this place. Feels alive again. I smiled, wiping my hands on a rag. They've been asleep long enough. He pointed toward this Brady jersey glowing under the track light. 3 collectors called me this morning. That court story's everywhere. They're offering stupid money for these. $28,000 for Brady alone. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Tell them no. He looked surprised. Avery, you could replace your car with that. Then I'd be trading memory for metal, I said. These were never investments, they're evidence. Proof of every sacrifice that made me who I am. Trevor nodded. You always were sentimental. Not sentimental, I said, turning one of the frames straight. Selective. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again. The court closed. The house quieted. And for the first time in a decade, the wall in my office wasn't a battlefield. It was a story. When people asked what I'd learned from the divorce, I told them this. Protect what you love from people who only know how to measure things. 2 years later, I remarried. His name is Caleb, and he's nothing like Ethan. He loves quiet. He loves baseball and coffee and the way I still tear up during championship reruns. He asks questions not because he doubts me, but because he wants to know the details of the things I care about. When we got engaged, he stood in my office staring at the wall for a long time. So these are the real ones? He asked finally. I nodded. Every stitch. He walked closer, tracing the edge of the bird jersey. You ever think about putting them back in storage? To protect them? I looked up at him, smiling. If I can't trust you with my jerseys, I can't trust you with my heart. He grinned. Fair enough. He stayed there for a while, studying the signatures. They're beautiful, he said. You can tell they're real. That's because you're actually looking, I said. Ethan never did. He saw price tags where meaning should have been. 3 years into our marriage, Caleb gave me a gift that almost broke me. He led me, eyes closed, into the office. Ready? When I opened them, a new frame hung beside my father's bird jersey. Inside was another bird. Not just any jersey, but one from his final game. How did you... Trevor helped, Caleb said. Took a while. Found it through a private collector. He handed me the receipt. I bought it with money I saved from skipping lunch out every day for 8 months. I turned to him stunned. Why? Because I wanted to add to your collection the right way. With intention. With sacrifice. With love. My throat tightened. He'd understood something Ethan never could, that the worth of something isn't in the cost, it's in the choice you make to keep it safe. That night, we hung it together. The jersey glowed under the soft light, bright and proud, like it knew it had been chosen for the right reasons. A few years later, I received a Facebook message from an unfamiliar name. When I opened it, I froze. Ethan Callahan. His message was short. I saw the article about your collection in Sports Illustrated. They say it's worth even more now. I still think I deserved half. I stared at it for a moment, then showed it to Caleb. He raised an eyebrow. You going to respond? Yeah, I said, typing slowly. You're absolutely right. They're worth more now, but not in dollars. They're worth more because they're hanging on the wall of someone who values them, instead of sitting in storage waiting to be sold by someone who never understood them. I paid for this life, Ethan, so I'm keeping it. Then I hit send. He never replied. Today, when I sit in that office, I don't see jerseys or dollar signs. I see my dad in the old armchair, crying during that first Super Bowl. I see my younger self, saving tips from waitressing to buy the Flutie jersey. I see the morning light bouncing off the bird jersey Caleb gave me, proof that love and respect can actually coexist in the same frame. People still ask if I'll ever sell them. I always give the same answer. No, I tell them, I paid for this, so I'm keeping it. And I don't just mean the jerseys. I mean the life I built after the wreckage, the boundaries I learned to protect, the peace that comes when you stop letting other people appraise your happiness. Some things aren't investments. They're reminders. That value isn't about what something costs. It's about what it kept safe while you were fighting to remember who you were. That's the real collection, and that's something no one can ever take.